This is Ag Matters PM from the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network, brought to you by the Iowa Soybean Association, your daily recap of the information that affects Iowa's farmers, producers, and consumers, right here in the heart of the heartland. With reports from our award-winning broadcast team of Dustin Hoffman, Riley Smith, and Mark Magnuson. Now, from the IARN studios in Des Moines, here's Riley Smith.
Good day and welcome into Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Riley Smith. Today is Thursday, May 9th of 2024. We're so glad you could join us for today's show. In today's episode, I visit with Chad Hart. He's Iowa State University's Professor of Economics and ISU Extension and Outreach Grain Market Specialist about the state of the ag economy as we head into planting season, especially as it relates to profit margins. But first, let's take a look at the closing market report.
It's time now for the Ag Matters PM Closing Market Summary, your source for market analysis and settlement prices from the day's trade in Chicago, courtesy of the folks at agmarket.net.
At the end of another trading day in the ag marketplace, we're here with Curt Kimmel of agmarket.net. Curt, ahead of tomorrow's WASDE report, how did the grain markets end today?
We saw a little backing and filling today, particularly on beans. Man, those July beans down hard, over 20 cents. Corn down a couple. Wheat was a little firmer. Wheat kind of higher overnight. We saw weather concerns in Russia. They had some dry conditions, but also had some frost freeze. And so that kind of prompted some buying in the wheat. Spilled over the corn for a little bit earlier this morning, and corn kind of gave up ship. But we did sell 132,000 tons of corn to Mexico. So Mexico continues to be our best friend. 60,000 was old crop. 71,000 tons was new crop. We did have a decent weekly export sales report this morning within trade expectations. The wheat sales was about 16 million bushels, old crop, new crop. Corn close to 40 million bushels on the weekly scale, and beans about 16 million bushels. So they're kind of hanging in there for the most part. We're just not seeing China come forward. They usually start coming forward here and booking new crop more than anything, as right now they're picking up that southern hemisphere. One other thing we did notice on the weekly export sales report, sorghum sales are huge. They're almost doubling through here. And so we're seeing some pretty good buying interest in that sorghum market there. Going into midday, we saw the commodity funds selling 4,600 contracts of corn, 6,300 contracts of beans, 4,800 contracts of meal, and about 7,400 contracts of soybean oil. So they were pretty aggressive back on the sell side. The wheat market, they saw funds buying about 3,700 contracts going into midday. As you hinted on there, we've got that monthly supply demand report tomorrow, 11 a.m. Central Time. Old crop, don't expect a whole lot of change there. Old crop corn carryout, 2.1 billion bushels, down about 20 million bushels. Ideas, demand's just a little better than what we were looking at on the April numbers. Soybeans, 339 million bushel carryout. It's the average trade guess. Last month we were at 340, down 1 million bushels. So they're not too brave moving that number a whole lot. The number still that's going to be monitored and probably adjusted here is the export side of the equation on the beans. Wheat carryout, about the same thing, 696 million bushels, down about 2 million bushels from last month. Now, the big E and the benchmark we're going to watch and be eager to see, and it's pretty well dialed in, is the new crop, the 24-25 production. And that's the numbers that's going to be affected, the crop we're trying to get in the ground now. Corn carryout, 2.84 is the average trade guess. Bean carryout is about 431 million bushels is the average trade guess there. And wheat, 786 million bushels. Those are probably about the highest numbers we see, particularly if the weather on the production side, if yield's not up to trend line expectations. On the bean side, be interesting to see what they do with the bean exports versus crush. One's going to offset the other. So that'll be a big day there tomorrow. Also, the South American average trade gas on Argentine corn is about 52 million metric tons. Last month, the USDA is 55. The Brazilian corn is 122.4 versus 124. Beans in Argentina, 49.6 versus 50. Brazilian beans, 52.6 versus 55. When you hear those numbers and listen to the private guys out of the Southern Hemisphere, you continue to say those numbers are too high. After that, we'll be back to weather. Here in Central Illinois, we're wet. We actually got guys got a big chunk of the beans in, about half the corn in. So it varies from there.
Then, of course, most of the focus on the grain markets, but what do we see on the livestock side of things?
Well, we're seeing just a kind of a sideways grinding through here. The hog and cattle market are both lower on the week. Box beef was down about $1.80 here from yesterday. Box beef was down about $1.80. We're seeing just kind of chopping sideways in through here. Futures wise, we're just a little soft on the pork side of the equation. Lean index was up, but the cutout was down. On the weekly sales, beef sales was 12.3. Japan and South Korea took a chunk of that. Pork sales were down from the previous week. We were down to 24.4. Actually, China was the top buyer, followed by Japan. The loins are starting to perk up a little bit. They're at 102 on the wholesale level. So if you're looking at some butterfly pork chops in through here, you might want to look for a sell on those pork loins and put them in the freezer.
All right, Curt, lots of great information today. For those of our listeners who would like to get in touch and learn more from the folks at agmarket.net, how can they do that?
1-800-779-1515. Agmarket.net, go to Intel, and tomorrow afternoon we'll have a recap, and our team will put together what they feel the numbers will spell out in the future after we see those reports at 11 a.m.
All right, Curt, thanks again for the analysis as always, and Godspeed as you guys navigate the WASD tomorrow.
Very good. It's always an adventure.
Thanks again to the folks at agmarket.net for joining us today. We'll take a look at how the numbers close, courtesy of the market window at iowaagnet.com. At the close, July corn down 2 even at 456.5. July soybeans down 19 1/4 at 1208.5. July soybean meal down 560 at 372.90. Soybean oil down 115 at 42.64. Chicago wheat up 3 1/2 at 637.5. Kansas City hard red wheat up 3 1/4 at 651 3/4. Minneapolis spring wheat up 1 even at 703 3/4. July oats up 4 1/4 at 401 3/4. On the Merck, June live cattle down 52 cents at 175.95. May feeders down 155 at 238.65. June lean hogs down $1 at 97.72. June pork cutout down a dime at 104.90. And May class 3 milk up 6 cents at 18.66. And that's been a check of the markets here on Ag Matters PM. We're going to go ahead and take a quick break to hear from our sponsor, the Iowa Soybean Association and the Soy Checkoff. When we come back, I talk with Iowa State University Professor Chad Hart. This is Ag Matters PM.
Iowa Soybean Association is driven to deliver for Iowa's 40,000 soybean farmers. We're proud to provide objective agronomic research, a helping hand with soil and water stewardship, and timely industry news powered by the Soybean Checkoff. Learn more at iasoybeans.com.
Welcome back to Ag Matters PM on the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network. I'm Riley Smith. Following a bumper crop from last year, corn and soybean prices for new crop are expected to drop for a second consecutive year. That leaves less margin to work with, but fortunately input costs are projected to fall as well. I talked with Chad Hart. He's Iowa State University's Professor of Economics and the ISU Extension and Outreach Grain Market Specialist about the state of the ag economy. Chad, thanks so much for taking the time to visit with us today. Obviously, profit margins are always pretty tight with the farmers, but every year it feels like they're getting just a little bit tighter. So what's the status on those profit margins this year? And, what's the forecast looking like for this growing season?
Well, at least thus far, I'll frame it this way. When we're looking at where prices are sitting right now, I can argue that both corn and soybeans have a little bit of a profit margin this year as we're looking at new crop. Old crop, what we found is a little bit of a split. Soybeans has been able to maintain a profit margin throughout the old crop season where corn lost a little bit here. So In essence, 2024 is shaping up a lot like 2023 in that margins are tight, but in this case, both crops are hovering around break even as opposed to last year we had, again, soy gaining a little bit at the expense of corn.
So then one of the big things when we have margins like this is kind of searching for those profits, because obviously you can just take your grain at any time and figure that out. But if you search for those profit levels and kind of make those sells at important times, drive those profits even higher just with a little more extra effort. So what do you have for advice for farmers on how to make sure that they're getting the profits at the highest level that they can?
Well, that's still, I think we have seen some of that already over the past couple of weeks. We have seen a little bit of a rally here. Typically around this time of year is when we see our seasonal highs in pricing. It's often related to concerns about weather and planting as we move forward. And so we've seen both corn and soybean prices rise over the past couple of weeks, and farmers have taken advantage of those opportunities. I think as we look going further down the line, you will see farmers sell a bit more crop as we move through the next couple of weeks. But then we'll be looking at setting up basically our harvest strategy for corn and soybeans and thinking about marketing into next spring and early summer. That's where, the storage bins come into play and really prepping up that marketing plan as we look out over the next year.
And then, of course, those margins, when we're looking at anticipating that for a growing season, can affect the farmer's decision for planting. And it actually looks that way so far. We've got corn down, soybean acreage up. So just thinking about that, how in general do we usually see the decisions go when it's corn versus soybeans in a year where profits might be a little more tight to come by?
Well, and that's the deal. When we look back at, what we're planting right now, that was a lot of that was driven by what happened with last year's crop. And as I mentioned, soybeans did a bit better than corn last year. And so that influences what we tend to plant this year. As we're looking right now and thinking forward, if you will, to the 2025 season, right now, neither corn or soybeans has an advantage. And that's when farmers tend to stick to their typical rotation as we look out there. But, that said, one of the things I'm going to be watching over the course of the next few weeks is the planting progress. And then at the end of June is when USDA does their acreage report, where they'll give us an updated snapshot of what farmers actually planted. And one of the things I'm watching for there is to see if we do see a little bit more corn and soybean planted than we anticipated back in March.
And then, Chad, are there any other just driving factors for the ag economy right now that our viewers and listeners should be aware of?
Well, the other thing I'm watching right now is, and this is sort of a weak spot right now when I'm looking at the 2024 crop and marketing over the course of the next year, export sales, especially those advanced sales on new crop, have been down for both corn and soybeans. So that is bringing up some concerns, especially as we approach the end of this week with USDA releasing what's known as the WASDE report, the World Ag Supply and Demand Estimates report. And I think the market is fearing that report's going to be a bit bearish, not only because of our ability to plant and the expectations of production this year, but I think we are seeing some concerns about global demand slippage as we look into 2024, 2025.
And actually, one last thing, Chad, of course, input prices, always a big topic for those farmers. How are those trending compared to especially the price levels that we're seeing in the grains?
Well, that's the deal. Typically, costs tend to follow prices, but there tend to be a year or two lag. And so when we think about how prices have been down over the past couple of years, costs were up last year. They were down a bit this year. Our Iowa State production cost estimates for 2024 are $4.60 for corn and $11.25 for soybeans. That's down, about 50 cents for corn and about 75 cents on the soybean side compared to 2023. So we have seen some cost relief coming into 2024 here, but that still means those margins are remaining very tight.
All right, Chad, lots of great information today. For those of our listeners and viewers who would like to get in touch and learn more from Iowa State University, the university or the extension, how can they do that?
Probably the biggest thing, if you're looking for ag economic information, is our Ag Decision Maker website. Just go to Google, type in Ag Decision Maker. We should be that first link there. We have about 425 informational files, fact sheets, spreadsheets that you can work with to address a lot of questions and concerns, not only about crop marketing, but basically any sort of farm management issue you may be wanting information on.
Chad, thanks again for taking the time to visit with us today.
Thank you.
That again was Chad Hart of Iowa State University. And that's the end of today's episode of Ag Matters PM. Thanks again for tuning in. You can find all of our content on our website at iowaagnet.com. Also follow us on social media at Facebook, X, LinkedIn, and TikTok, and find our video content as well as previous episodes of AM/PM on our YouTube channel. Make sure you subscribe and hit the notification bell to see when those videos go live. Don't forget as well our morning, midday, and closing market podcasts on Apple, Amazon, Google, Spotify, and Podbean. From the Iowa Agribusiness Radio Network studios in Des Moines, I'm Riley Smith. On behalf of Mark Magnuson, Andy Peterson, and Dustin Huffman, we thank you for watching. This has been Ag Matters PM.